for all that had befallen their town. They gathered more people and tried to storm his house. Barricaded inside, he pleaded his innocence, but they wouldn't listen. No one was sure who set the fire, but soon enough, the old mansion was aflame. The whole town watched as Mr. Hamilton screamed and burned. As they stood at the charred remains of the mansion, the stench of burnt meat thick in the air, guilt washed over them like ash. What had they done? How would they ever find clues to the missing people now? As the days passed, 2 of the missing teens turned up, having admitted they'd skipped town to elope and were now back to face their parents. Could there have been reasonable explanations for the other supposed victims too? Although filled with remorse and shame, no one in the town talked about what they had done, hoping they could just bury the past. On Thanksgiving, someone from the sanitation department swept through the neighborhood when he noticed the odd-looking statue, the one in the former Mr. Hamilton's yard. It was similar to one of the famous Easter Island heads, only far more sinister in appearance. Having once stood guard outside the burned-down house, it had been left to disrepair. The worker decided to gussy it up. He cleaned one side of the structure and then moved the cart and himself towards its back. There, he noticed something strange. The statue had a small handle. The curious worker pulled it, causing the top to open like a jack-o'-lantern. The worker looked inside and gasped. Within the interior of the eerie, giant stone head were the dismembered skeletons of at least a dozen people. At first he thought it must be a silly prank, something left over from Halloween, but called the cops anyway. Sure enough, the skeleton's DNA were tested. It was a match to all of the people who were still missing, and the only fingerprints on the handle, other than the cleaners, were from Mr. Hamilton. From that day on, the citizens of Cape Rocknet were no longer haunted by guilt. Instead, they felt fully vindicated for their actions, glorying over it in a way. They had delivered mob justice and stopped a psychotic serial killer from butchering anyone else ever again. Thank you so much, Yashika Kashyap, for inspiring this vigilante tale. The only thing I can hope is that this town understands that Mr. Hamilton was more than likely the exception to the rule when it comes to new people in a community. Listener, have you ever gotten caught up in mob mentality? Were there serious consequences for the group's actions?
This episode is brought to you by DirecTV Stream. Introducing DirecTV Stream, the best of live TV and on demand, which means you can get all your favorite sports, movies, and shows together. So you can watch new episodes of your favorite reality shows live or binge old episodes on demand. Either way, get ready for some drama. And the best part? DirecTV Stream has no annual contract. DirecTV Stream. Get your TV together at directtv.com. Requires high-speed internet and compatible device. Content varies by package and location. Restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Navy Federal Credit Union. Buying a car gets better when you're a member of Navy Federal Credit Union. Thanks to their fully loaded car buying experience, you can finance, buy, protect, and enjoy your purchase all through one convenient place. Plus, with pre-approval that's good for 90 days, low rates, and 24/7 customer support, you'll have an easy one-stop shopping experience. Learn more at NavyFederal.org/car buying. Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission. Insured by NCUA. Credit and collateral subject to approval.
Often it can seem you are the only person who can see someone's true colors. However, you never know who else is watching. Like in this story inspired by Mariah. I attended an all-girls Catholic high school. It was my parents' decision, but I was willing to make it work. Unfortunately, a group of teenagers a year ahead of me made it their mission to make my life miserable starting at orientation. Most of the people there had grown up together since kindergarten. but I was the new kid in town, and some people found new to equal unwanted. When the dean introduced me in the assembly, 4 female classmates immediately started snickering, led by the most awful of them all, Sadie. I tried to let most of their insults pass me by. After a couple of weeks, I started to get the lay of the land and even made a few friends. I became very fond of Tamara, who showed me around and even gave tips on how to get away with altering my uniform, so I didn't feel like I was wearing a habit. I noticed Tamara and I kept taking the long way to get to homeroom. Once I realized we were going outside, clear around the building instead of through, I had to ask why. Casually, she told me about a group of teens who were superstitious about the forbidden hallway. Apparently, there was a haunted corridor on the 2nd floor where an old nun had hung herself decades before. Tamara swore she had only passed through it a couple of times in 2 years, and only because there was a blizzard outside. She said the temperature drops in the hallway and you feel like someone is behind you. Even other teachers know about it. There are no classes there anymore. The rooms there are closed and locked. Now, I am an adventurous person, but I believed Tamara and felt no need to venture into this world of magic and mystery. I would have been fine to live the rest of my days avoiding the Forbidden Hall. But the 4 tyrants had another plan. We had just closed our lockers, about to head to homeroom, when the makeup mafia approached, blocking us from our path. They offered to walk Tamara and I to class, but Sadie was clearly forcing us toward the forbidden hallway. Tamara looked truly terrified. I tried to talk our way out of it, but this was happening. I even pushed back on one of them, but that only made them angrier. The next thing I knew, a cold chill climbed the back of my neck. I could feel the hairs prickling. I looked around and realized we were in the middle of the hallway. Sadie pulled out a key and unlocked one of the doors. This had been their plan all along, and we were just catching up to it. They shoved us both into the room, which was dark, then locked the door. We were trapped. We held on to each other tight, crouched on the floor with our eyes closed, Tamara praying the Our Father and Hail Mary, and me trying to chime in. Suddenly, we heard screams from outside the door. Then 4 thuds hit the ground. Slowly, the door opened. We hesitated for a moment, terrified of what was out there waiting for us. Tamara squeezed my hand so tight she was leaving nail marks. We cautiously went through the door and stepped out into the corridor. Each of our tormentors were lying on their backs, passed out. As we approached them, we could see their throats all had bruises and red marks in the shapes of fingers upon them, as if they had been strangled. But by who? Their bodies were so still, we thought the worst, until suddenly, Sadie gasped for breath, quickly followed by the others. They were traumatized. Whatever they had witnessed must have been so terrifying that they totally ignored us, fleeing the corridor. As they left, we began to feel an overwhelming presence. It was freezing and utterly silent. Filled with dread, we dropped to our knees, Tamara beginning to pray. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but as I dared to look up, I saw her. The stories were true. The ghostly nun seemed to be floating, just watching us. Then she smiled, gave a nod, and vanished back into the walls. The temperature rose, and we no longer had a sense of foreboding. She had saved us. Those 4 teens never returned, immediately enrolling in other schools. And as for Tamara and I, well, we take the forbidden hallway all the time now, but we never forget to give a thankful nod and smile. Thank you so much, Mariah. I enjoy that danger was danger to some, but not for all. Listener, do you feel like there are spirits or entities that watch over you? In a protective way or in a harmful way? Or is it a little bit of both?
This episode is brought to you by the Volvo XC40. Did you know that there's a bike shortage around the world right now? Because more people are seeking socially distant modes of transportation? Chances are, you'll be sharing the city streets with more cyclists. The Volvo XC40 SUV is made to help protect people in and around the car, with detection technology keeping an eye out, using high-tech cameras and sensors, and can automatically apply the brakes to help avoid a collision. The XC40, for everyone's safety. Visit volvocars.com/US to learn more.
Habits can be easy to form, but hard to break. While they may give us comfort, eventually, without changing, they can trap us in ways too terrible to even imagine. Naomi always had trouble sleeping. She'd stay awake for hours trying to drift off, and when she did finally sleep, it was always restless and frequently interrupted. Books and TV didn't help. The only thing that helped was playing her favorite video game, Myrtle's Island. It was a simple concept. You played a character named Myrtle and just explored an isolated tropical island. Naomi found it soothing. During especially restless periods, she'd play it every night. Late one evening, Naomi was enjoying her usual session of the game. She kept playing and playing. She stared at the screen for what must have been hours. After such a long session, she got thirsty and decided to grab a drink. She took her eyes away from the screen and gasped. She was no longer in her bedroom. She was on Myrtle's Island. Naomi thought she must be dreaming. She could really feel the hot sand, really see and hear the lapping waves. To her, this was the coolest dream she'd ever had. However, as she explored the island, something was off. It should be beautiful and sunny, but as she approached the water, it became murky. The sky had gone from pure blue to a deep, cloudy gray. Glancing back to the island, she spotted a figure. Shaggy green pixie hair with silver eyes and a grayish-blue hoodie. Myrtle. She ran up to greet her friend. Myrtle didn't respond or even acknowledge Naomi's presence. She just proceeded towards a small wooden shack in the middle of the island. Naomi was already familiar with this structure. It was the Keeper's Shack, a place where she might find a clue leading to her next adventure. Once inside, she looked around. This, too, was different than she remembered. It was supposed to be a simple shack with a dream catcher and a map on the walls. But inside, it had been torn apart. The words, "You can't run," had been smeared on the walls in what looked like blood. At that, there was a loud banging on the tin roof. They both looked towards the door. Nothing. Suddenly, a sinewy, overly long arm smashed through the roof. Myrtle yelled in pain as it violently yanked her up through the ceiling. As soon as Myrtle was pulled out of view, Naomi heard a loud, wet snap, and Myrtle's yell cut off. Through the window, Naomi saw her lifeless body tossed to the side of the shack. She ran out of the shed as fast as she could. This wasn't a part of the game she knew. But she did know that in the game, there was a dock with a boat nearby. That boat would take her to a separate cove, but when she reached it, the boat was gone. Just then, she heard whatever had killed Myrtle approaching, calling Naomi's name in a screeching, hag-like voice. She looked back and came face to face with a creature, tall and shrouded in darkness, its eyes burning bright into her soul. Before Naomi could react, it pounced. The last thing she felt were the talons scratching at her throat, then the herky-jerky snap of her own neck. Her vision slowly dimmed to all red. The words, "You can't run," appearing before her. She was dead. Then suddenly, she was respawned back in the game again. As she heard the creature again, she tried to run, but it was no use. The creature always won. It always caught her. Her vision turned red, yet as before, she respawned. Over and over, repeatedly. Eventually, instead of trying to run, she faced her nemesis, screaming, "Just end it!" This time, when she opened her eyes, she couldn't see the creature. Something had changed. She was back at the shed. Myrtle appeared, but instead of being pleased to see Naomi, she screamed and tried to run. What in the world? Reaching out to stop her, she gasped in shock. Instead of her own arm, the limb was sinewy and overly long. Initial shock dissipated almost immediately as she was filled with a sudden rage and bloodlust. Screeching in a voice that was not her own, she chased Myrtle down, reaching her easily with newfound speed and agility. She raised the taloned hand to her prey's throat and slit it open, blood gurgling, then twisted her neck. Snap. As Naomi roared in triumph, she realized her final exhausted plea had worked. To some extent, anyway. She was still stuck in the game, respawning over and over, only this time, instead of fearing death, she was the monster. And she liked it. This week's podcast stories were edited by Markia McCarty, Janine Pipe, and Sarah Lukasiewicz. Narration by Markia McCarty. Audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris. Additional audio editing by Calvin Linderman. Art and graphics by Mari Carlson. Produced by Hannah Mullen and Markia McCarty. Music by Sapphire Sandalo and Calvin Linderman. If you have a story you'd like to submit, send me an email at somethingscary@snarled.com. Don't forget to watch the video version of Something Scary over at youtube.com/snarled. And if you'd like to support the show and everything we do at Snarled, join our Patreon at patreon.com/snarled. Until next time, my dark darlings, sweet dreams.
Angie's List is now Angie, and caring for your home just got easier. Whether you need help with routine maintenance or a dream remodel, Angie makes it easy to see reviews, compare quotes, and connect with top local pros who can get the job done right. Plus, you can see upfront pricing and instantly book hundreds of projects. No phone tap, just the work you need done at a time that works for you. Angie's got your to-do list covered from start to finish. Book your next home project today at Angie.com. That's ANGI.com.
We did it again. Verizon was just named America's most reliable network by Root Metrics for the 16th time in a row, proving once again that nobody builds networks like Verizon builds networks. That's why we're building 5G right. That's why there's only one best network, Verizon. Best and most reliable based on Root Metrics reports from second half 2013 to first half 2021 of 3 operators on all network types combined, not specific to 5G networks. We did it again. Verizon was just named America's most reliable network by Root Metrics for the 16th time in a row, proving once again that nobody builds networks like Verizon builds networks. That's why we're building 5G right. That's why there's only one best network, Verizon. Best and most reliable based on Root Metrics reports from second half 2013 to first half 2021 of 3 operators on all network types combined, not specific to 5G networks.
This episode is brought to you by Sally Hansen. Introducing new It Takes Two, your favorite Sally Hansen Miracle Gel. Now available in one convenient pack. 2 simple steps, color and top coat for an up to 8-day mani. Our newest innovation from the Sally Hansen Miracle Gel that you love. So you can create a perfect manicure anywhere. Find Sally Hansen at your local retailer.
This episode is brought to you by NerdWallet. Got money goals? NerdWallet's got the tools, calculators, and side-by-side comparisons to help turn your dreams into realities. So whether you want an investing account for your kid's college fund, a refinance to free up cash, or a smarter credit card with travel rewards for your dream vacation, NerdWallet's got your back.
Welcome seemed to notice her. Eventually, her trek through this mysterious place led her to someone who wanted to help. Dr. Metheus. He introduced himself with a calm manner, telling her that there was no reason to worry about her loss of memory. He told her she had had an accident and her memory should return eventually. He explained, "This is a safe place. This is your new home." Even though the doctor was friendly, Mita didn't trust him. As the doctor spoke, Mita noticed something moving out of the corner of her eye. When she tried to look directly at it, however, there was nothing there. When she looked back at the doctor, she could see it once more in her peripheral vision. Whatever it was a tall, thin, hunched creature with veiny, knife-like claws for hands. It had tiny, sharp eyes that shimmered with malice. Its smoky-colored skin disguised it within the shadows. Dr. Metheus noticed and asked if she was seeing something. That's when the creature spoke to her.
"Tell him nothing, and don't believe his lies,"
the creature hissed. Mita told the doctor she wasn't seeing anything, and he frowned and explained the rules. She was not to leave the premises, and she had to stay in this section of the building at all times. He said that he wanted to help her get better, and if she behaved, she would have a wonderful life here. The creature whispered in her ear that she should escape. This doctor was not who he said he was. This was not her home, and she was not safe. Mita agreed with the monster in the corner of her eye and began to plan her quiet escape. That night, she snuck out of bed in the middle of the night. The creature crawled along with her down the vast halls, just out of her sight, whispering directions and suggesting rooms to explore. It led her to a janitor's closet and instructed her to take some of the cleaning supplies. It told her where the janitor kept his cigarettes and, more importantly, his lighter. The creature instructed her to mix the cleaning supplies together and then led her to the maintenance room. But Dr. Metheus was there waiting for her and said, "I know you can see the creature and hear it too. You must not listen to it this time, Mita." The creature screamed in Mita's ear,
"He wants to kill us, Mita. We have to kill him first."
Mita threw the bottle of mixed cleaning supplies at the doctor and the wall of electrical breakers behind him. The doctor screamed as the chemicals burned his eyes, while the creature told Mita to light the chemical-soaked rag they had prepared. Mita threw it at the doctor and the whole room went ablaze. There was an explosion, and Mita was knocked out of the maintenance room and into the hallway. She watched in terror as the flames surrounded her. She didn't know where to go, and the smoke was too much. She felt herself passing out, but suddenly, something was dragging her. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see the creature pulling her outside to safety. Once they were outside, she was able to breathe again and got back to her feet. When she looked up, she stood face to face with the creature. No longer hiding just out of sight, she could see its evil, malevolent eyes. She realized it was the one lying to her all along, and this wasn't the first time it compelled her to do something terrible. She tried to run, but the creature grabbed her and placed a bony claw on her forehead. Her eyes grew heavy, and she passed out asleep. She woke up in an unknown place and couldn't remember how she got there. Panic set in as she realized she couldn't remember anything except that her name was Mita. Thank you so much, Chiara, for inspiring this Groundhog's Day-esque tale of mayhem, murder, and terror. Listener, have you ever lost your memory? Any guesses as to what happened to you at that time? Would you be brave enough to stand up to such a monster as this?
Everything's opening up and I'm excited that this summer will be the most normal I've had for a while. Barbecues, pool parties, and doing what I want with my time whenever. Summertime fun like binging our beachside horror video episodes like Drowning in the Shallows or Lured to Their Deaths, or just kicking back and enjoying Best Fiends. I had to do a restart recently, but that didn't stop me. I'm charging along again and I'm already at level 160, Sludge Dread. I have no plans of stopping anytime soon. 30 minutes feels like 30 seconds. Best Fiends is a quick brain vacation whenever you want it. For the holiday weekend, Best Fiends is celebrating Fiend Dependence. I love the graphics of their little version of the Statue of Liberty. Best Fiends always has plenty of new challenges, puzzles, and animations. There's just something new every day. Download the 5-star rated puzzle game Best Fiends free today on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's Friends without the R, Best Fiends. Shopping for clothes can be a bit daunting. You never know if things will fit, returns can be stressful and difficult, and going to your same stores trying to find new looks, you can come up empty. This season, let Stitch Fix do all the hard work. My personal stylist picked out this lacy black top from Hawthorne for me. It shipped fast and in my size, plus I love it. I can see me wearing this out for events, and I would have picked this out for myself, but I didn't have to. There's no subscription required. Try Stitch Fix once or set up automatic deliveries. You'll pay just a $20 styling fee for each box, which gets credited towards pieces you keep. And there are no hidden fees, ever. Stitch Fix has styles and clothing to fit any occasion for everyone. They ship all over the US and available in the UK as well. Get started today at stitchfix.com/scary and you'll get 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. That's stitchfix.com/scary for 25% off when you keep everything.
Feed you filled with end stores trying to find new looks to look for. You'll miss the ghost story that's right in front of you. Like in this story, inspired by Deanna. Winnie nervously rode the bus to her grandma's house. The skies were dark from the hurricane heading straight towards Jamaica, and Winnie hoped the bus would make it to the tiny town where her grandmother lived before the storm hit. Luck wasn't on her side, and rain began to pour heavily several minutes before the bus made it to the station. Winnie hopped off and waited for her grandma, who was supposed to pick her up. With no sign of her and the storm picking up, Winnie decided to head on foot to her grandma's house. She hiked a couple of miles past an old church and a graveyard, up a steep hill to reach her grandma, who lived in an ancient wooden cottage, held together by rusty old nails that protruded everywhere throughout the house. Her grandma looked confused when Winnie appeared at her doorstep, but she quickly welcomed the girl inside. Hunkered down to brave the storm, Winnie and her grandma stayed inside for several days. This was difficult because Grandma didn't have Wi-Fi, TV, or even radio, and Winnie had forgotten her phone charger. There wasn't anything to do but sit and listen to the old lady spin her duppy stories. Duppies were spirits that were anchored to earth by rusty nails.
When Winnie said that dozens of Duppies were no doubt tied down by all the nails that spiked the house, her grandma just laughed a wheezy laugh. She told Winnie that an 11-year-old was too young to understand the world, much less the otherworldly. Winnie sat inside and suffered Grandma's stories. Most of the time, the Duppies were malevolent spirits that usually tricked and haunted the living, but sometimes they helped if the person was pure of spirit. All of the stories ended with the person learning some kind of lesson while also paying a terrible price. After days filled with endless Duppy tales, Winnie couldn't hide her boredom. None of these stories were scary enough. Plus, she was tired of all the lessons, so she begged her grandma to tell her some other kind of story, one that was filled with excitement and terror. Grandma shook her head and said Winnie wasn't understanding otherworldly spirits or the afterlife. They aren't meant to scare you like silly ghost stories. Duppy tales are meant to teach you about life and about yourself. After many days, the sun came smiling into the sky. When Winnie looked out the window that morning, she was thrilled to see her parents headed up the hill. Passing through the front door of her grandma's cottage, her t-shirt caught on a nail, and she had to pull the entire metal spike out of the wood to free herself. She ran down the grassy slope into her parents' arms. To her surprise, they seemed more emotional about reuniting than she was. As they all hugged, she felt her mother's chest heave with sobs, and her father's strong arms squeezed both of them tight. Winnie's mother began to sputter out something about the hurricane, knocking out the phones and blocking the roads when Winnie interrupted. "We're fine, Mom. I was bored, but it's not like Grandma didn't feed me." Her parents' faces fell. "Grandma? Feed you?" her mom asked. Of course she did. Winnie ate pretty well. Fried plantains, curry goat, salt fish. "Winnie," whispered her mother, "your grandmother died 13 days ago. She was hit by a car when she was waiting for you. The EMT got her to the funeral home just before the storm, then everyone went to seek shelter." Her parents got the news but were unable to reach Winnie on her phone. They've been trying to get a hold of her for over a week. "If Grandma is dead, then who?" Winnie trailed off. Winnie sprinted up the hill, her parents behind her. When they reached the house, it was empty. But there was the faint sound of her grandma's wheezy laugh and the clink of a rusty nail falling from Winnie's pocket. Thank you so much, Deanna, for inspiring this hurricane ghost story. Listener, do you talk to spirits? Do you talk to your guides? Do they talk back? How would you know if you were talking to a dead person? Would you be afraid? Has that happened to you? Tell us your story at somethingscary@snarled.com.
Angie's List is now Angie, and getting your to-do list done just got easier. Between back to school and with the holidays around the corner, it can feel like there's no time to tackle home projects. Whether you need help with emergency repairs or major upgrades, Angie matches you with top local pros who can get the job done right. Browse reviews, see upfront pricing, and instantly book hundreds of projects. Save time for what matters most. Book your next project at Angie.com. That's ANGI.com.
This episode is brought to you by DirecTV Stream. Introducing DirecTV Stream, the best of live TV and on demand, which means you can get all your favorite sports, movies, and shows together. So you can watch new episodes of your favorite reality shows live or binge old episodes on demand. Either way, get ready for some drama. And the best part? DirecTV Stream has no annual contract. DirecTV Stream. Get your TV together at directtv.com. Requires high-speed internet and compatible device. Content varies by package and location. Restrictions apply.
Nothing is worse than waking up with a bad feeling in your gut.
except maybe the horrible thing that is about to happen. Like in this story inspired by Ball. Marcus couldn't sleep. He was still amped up from his day out with his friends. Lately, they'd been pulling pranks on the neighborhood, and it was so much fun. They'd knock on doors and run away, put trash in mailboxes, and smash all the dumb lawn ornaments people kept in front of their homes. He'd been laughing all day and still thinking about all the fun they had. Marcus went downstairs to get water to calm himself. While he filled his cup, he thought he saw something move outside the window. Probably just a stray cat, he convinced himself. But as he walked back to the stairs, he saw something move again out of a different window. There was a thud at the door. He jumped, startled. He wasn't expecting anyone. He peeked out the window into the dark night. He didn't see anyone or anything out there. So, he slowly opened the front door. Nothing. No one. Then he looked down on the doorstep. Standing on the stoop was a garden gnome lawn ornament. The kind that everyone in the neighborhood had somewhere in their yard. The kind he had been smashing all day. This one stood about 2 feet tall from the top of its long red pointed hat to the bottom of its short stubby legs. A dopey grin adorned its face above its white stone beard. Marcus assumed one of his friends was pranking him and took a step outside and looked around, but no one was there. However, when he turned back, the gnome was now inside the house instead of on the stoop. He froze and stared at the statue, unsure how it got inside the house. It was late, and Marcus was very tired, so he decided to put the thing outside so he could investigate it in the morning. He reached down to pick up the statue, but it suddenly fell over just before he touched it. Marcus jumped back, startled by the sudden movement. He once more looked around outside. One of his friends had to be out there with a remote control. He turned back to the statue, and it was once more on its feet. Marcus smirked and reached down for the statue to figure out how it worked. And that is when the statue came to life. The dopey face now replaced with one of pure malice. It opened its mouth and chomped down on Marcus's hand with its stone teeth. Pain shot through his hand like he slammed it in a car door. Marcus cried out and tried to shake the heavy statue off, but it was clamped on tight. Finally, he managed to stand on the writhing gnome statue and drag his hand out of its mouth. His hand was bruised and bloodied, but at least he was free for the moment. Marcus held his foot on the gnome as it struggled against his weight, but once it started chomping at his toes, he decided to make a run for it. As soon as he removed his foot, he ran up the stairs into his bedroom. He heard the sound of stone being scraped against the floor and up the stairs. Then a loud banging on his door until it flung open wide, revealing a very angry-looking garden gnome. Marcus shouted, "What do you want from me?" It didn't respond. It just stood there. Marcus turned in a desperate attempt to jump out of his second-story window. Then he felt his leg twist. The gnome's stubby arms held him tight and clamped down onto his calf until it ripped a piece out of Marcus. He screamed and kicked at the gnome until finally he broke free. Marcus ran at his window and jumped through it, shattering the glass and sending himself flying into his front yard. He hit the ground with a hard thud. He laid there for a moment, but other than the pain in his hand and calf, he felt relatively unharmed. He quickly jumped to his feet, but just as he was about to run down the street, he realized he was surrounded. Statues of garden gnomes of all shapes and sizes filled his yard. Every single one from every yard in his neighborhood was there, and they all had the same evil look on their face. Marcus screamed as they ran towards him, baring their stone teeth. Thank you so much, Paul, for inspiring this garden gnome tale. In a way, it reminds me of what happens to Sid in Toy Story. Listener, have you ever been creeped out by those statues that happen to be in neighbors' yards? What would you do if they started to move? Do you think you could take them? One of them? All of them?
This episode is brought to you by Discover. Want to hear something amazing? Discover matches all the cash back you earn on your credit card at the end of your first year automatically, with no limit on how much they match. How amazing is that? In fact, it's even more amazing because Discover is accepted at 99% of places in the US that take credit cards. So when it comes to Discover, get used to hearing yes more often. Learn more at discover.com/yes. 2021 Nielsen Report. Limitations apply.
Idle hands are the devil's playthings, so it's important to be mindful when you have nothing to do. Otherwise, evil will find something to do with you. Like in this story inspired by Colin. Thank you to our Patreon member Fabian, whose name we used in this story. My grandmother's house was old, massive, and intimidating. There was an old ornate mirror in my grandmother's basement that had been covered for as long as I could remember. We were told to never touch anything in the house, especially that mirror. She had no TV or internet, so when we stayed, we always just played outside. One gray and rainy afternoon, my grandmother was babysitting my cousin Fabian and me. Stuck inside, we had exhausted every board game and book inside the house. So, out of boredom, we found ourselves playing rock, paper, scissors in the dining room. Anything to keep us busy till it was time to go home. By the 5th or 6th dull game of rock, paper, scissors, Fabian lit up. He remembered the covered mirror in the basement. I followed him down into the dark, damp basement. We navigated around old boxes and dusty furniture, careful to avoid cobwebs that hung in thick curtains everywhere. Deep in the back of the basement was the mirror. It was tall and stood on 4 clawed feet. A dusty white sheet covered with a thick rope tied around it to keep the sheet in place. Fabian untied the knot on the rope and let it slide to the ground, where it landed with a heavy thud and blew dust everywhere, which made everything feel ominous. My heart pounded as Fabian pulled away the sheet to let it join the rope on the floor. As it slid away, tarnished and dusty glass was revealed. The silver backing of the mirror was corroded at the edges, and the whole thing made our reflections look distant, as if trapped in another world. I told Fabian to put the sheet back, but he said he wanted to see if it was really haunted. His grin widened as he tapped on the mirror, and it made an unsettling, tinkling sound. I got up and headed for the basement steps, and Fabian mocked me for being a snitch. That stung. I didn't want to mess with the mirror, but I would never rat him out either. So I stayed down there and rummaged through the old boxes instead. Eventually, he got bored of the mirror and asked me to play rock, paper, scissors again. I ignored him, and he scoffed at me, said he'd play the game with himself in the mirror instead. He loudly said, "Best out of 3. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot!" several times to taunt me, and then, for a while, there was silence. Suddenly, he called my name with a distress in his voice I'd never heard before. I ran over and found him sitting by the mirror, frightened. He asked me to watch as he played the game in the mirror. He made a fist with his right hand for rock. His reflection did the same. He played rock 3 times in a row, and his reflection followed suit. I rolled my eyes, but Fabian told me to keep watching. Best out of 3. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. On the next round, Fabian formed his hand into a pair of scissors. His reflection's hand formed a fist. Rock. I rubbed my eyes, unbelieving, staring at Fabian's reflection's fist, then at Fabian's scissors. Fabian threw again, forming his hand flat like paper. His reflection's hand formed into scissors. I told Fabian to cover the mirror, but before he could do that, his reflection grinned widely and said,
Best out of 3, I win.
It reached out with his hand. The room began to rumble and shake as if a train passed right below us as the reflection's hand pushed through the glass like it was liquid. Fabian's reflection grabbed him by the front of his shirt. I screamed as Fabian was slowly pulled into the mirror. Fabian struggled against his reflection as it used his other hand to grab my cousin by his head. I grabbed his legs and tried to pull him back, but the reflection was too strong. Fabian screamed from the other side of the mirror as something began to rip under the reflection's grip. His reflection then elongated its fingers, wrapping them like cables around his head and hooking into his mouth, and then dragged the wailing Fabian into the mirrored distance. I fell to the floor, breathing hard, my heart hammering in my chest as I tried to comprehend what had just happened. Then my own reflection blinked and smiled at me as it said,
Come here. It's our turn. Best out of 3.
This week's podcast stories were edited by Markia McCarty, Sarah Lou Kosowitz, and Dennis Culver. Narration by Markia McCarty. Audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris. Art and graphics by Mari Carlson. Produced by Hannah Mullen and Markia McCarty. Music by Sapphire Sandalo and Calvin Linderman. Executive producer is Gail Gilman. If you have a story you'd like to submit, send me an email at somethingscary@snarled.com. Don't forget to watch the video version of Something Scary over at youtube.com/snarled. And if you'd like to support the show and everything we do at Snarled, join our Patreon at patreon.com/snarled. Until next time, my dark darlings, sweet dreams.
Angie's List is now Angie, and caring for your home just got easier. Whether you need help with routine maintenance or a dream remodel, Angie makes it easy to see reviews, compare quotes, and connect with top local pros who can get the job done right. Plus, you can see upfront pricing and instantly book hundreds of projects. No phone tag, just the work you need done at a time that works for you. Angie's got your to-do list covered from start to finish. Book your next home project today at Angie.com. That's ANGI.com.
We did it again. Verizon was just named America's most reliable network by Root Metrics for the 16th time in a row, proving once again.
Support for this podcast comes from NHTSA. If you're ever stopped at a railway crossing and the signals are flashing and you don't see the train or it appears to be moving slowly, and you're thinking maybe you could get across the tracks before the train comes, think about this. Even if the engineer sees you and applies emergency brakes right away, it can take a train over a mile to stop. Over a mile to stop. By that time, it's too late, and the resulting crash will be deadly. Stop. Trains can't.
Welcome to Scary Story Podcast. In our stories, we explore a traumatic dark memory and the role it plays in daily life. Then fear arrives in our second story in the shape of a ghostly woman that waits for you in the dark. My name is Edwin. Here is a scary story. Seatbelt. I watched as the 2 kids that my friends brought over one afternoon chased each other in the front yard. Their parents were supposedly out for a regular doctor's appointment. Martina had heard around their circle of friends that Patty was about to get plastic surgery. Implants or something. I don't know much about that, but I didn't find it surprising. And definitely didn't find it worthy of what seemed like 2-hour conversations with my wife every single day that past week. Martina stepped out to the porch with me, the two kids now rolling over each other on the grass. "Hey," I yelled out. Rough play was out of the question. I felt Martina's light hand touch mine with that familiar, "I'll take care of it" feel she used to give me. Flat out had to ask Martina if she had thought about surgery herself, and I offended her, I'm assuming, since she gasped and then started telling me even more about how the procedures work and things like that. It is a topic I avoid, especially after seeing my own nose in the mirror every day. But I had lived with it almost all my life, and I was used to it by now. She was the one that had to see it every day, while all I had to do was avoid mirrors and I'd be okay. She then told me about what their other friend, I forget her name, said about the surgery that Patty was getting, and how they assumed that they were going to cover up the procedure since, according to their suspicions, Patty would have to be looked after for a couple of weeks, and part of her body will be swollen beyond belief. Again, I didn't ask about this. It was just a thing that presented itself. It presented itself over and over, and eventually all of the useless information got into this brain of mine. Martina and I met with her telling me stories about her friends and her life in college. I figured that if she knew right off the bat what a terrible listener I am, she'd politely let me know that we wouldn't work and move on. And then I'd move on. Just like all those other times. But Martina was different. Sure, she talked a lot, but she also took my obsessions very seriously, and in a strange way, I almost respected them. They weren't too bad, but I knew of the trouble they had caused me and my friends in the past. I couldn't have roommates because of the precautions I would take over everything. Spills in the kitchen were to be cleaned up right away. Shoes with non-slip soles to be worn at all times. No glass cups or plates or bottles. I try to get my vegetables and fruits pre-sliced to avoid using the only knife in the house. Martina used it most of the time. It was another thing with the nightmares. Things I simply couldn't erase. I haven't had the same dreams as often as I used to, but the memories are still there, and they are not pretty. There's one that comes back in flashes. I'm sitting in the car. My shoes look small and untied. I look out to the window to see the blue sky. The window above me is tall enough so that I couldn't see what was next to me in the side of the car. That sky more than made up for it. Another flash. I look up toward the seat in front of me and laugh. Having the window open like that, the wind at the perfect temperature flowing almost like the texture of water over my forehead, splashing behind my head and on the edges of my ears. A second flash. A girl, my sister, I think, sitting in the back seat with me, reaching her hand out toward me as I laugh at her face that she's making. My laughter dies off as I stare at a red rectangle, a button, on the seat next to her. She laughs. I laugh again. She looks away to the window as the red button pulls me toward it, but when I press it, it doesn't move. It doesn't do anything. I feel disappointment, anger, almost. I press harder until I hear a snap. My sister looks down on my hand and smiles, then pushes my hand away. Just then, the car begins to shake, and I hear the screeching sounds of another car. Glass breaking. The third and final flash. I open my eyes, and I can see through the window now. The girl, my sister, is across the highway. Her leg bent the other way. I can't see her face, and I can't tell if it's her. The window is broken, and she doesn't move. And it is like this most times. Other times I hear men in uniform coming to get me. My mom and dad running toward the young girl in the highway. Blood runs down my mom's face. She picks up tiny white bones from the road and cups them in her bloody left hand. Sometimes I hear sirens, and others I don't hear anything. Then there's what I call the fictional memory. Things that I've heard over and over from my family, but I don't remember them personally. Though if I think back hard enough, I can kind of make up a scene in my head where this takes place. Doctors told my family that it would be better to wait while my face developed a little more. That maybe they could reconstruct part of my nose and ears. But supposedly they insisted so much that they eventually found a doctor that would do the procedure for me. And they were able to, quote, save my face. And I can kind of see it. I mean, I don't know how much of it is true, but they put me on a bed with blue papery sheets. And I get wheeled over to a room with green tile walls. I don't remember much after that. I don't think my face looks too bad. The nose is crooked, and I like to say that it bothers me only a little bit. But I know, and Martina knows, that it is a reason why I keep to myself most of the time. A reminder of that strange day and the roots of all these memories in that car. The sirens. And the death of my sister. We both sit there as Fred and Patty arrive to pick up the two kids. One of them comes up toward my lawn chair. Her backpack was next to my bright green Gatorade bottle. She says thank you to me. I say that she's welcome as she grabs her backpack with both hands and runs toward the sidewalk. Her white shoes hit against the grass as I hold back the instinct to tell her not to run. She opens the door for her little brother and he jumps in the car. She follows behind him. Fred waves at me and points at his invisible watch as if to tell me that he's running late and can't stop by to chat. I don't need to chat. Martina stands up and walks over to their car, though. Maybe that's what Fred's signal was for. Martina can talk for a while. Patty waves at me as Martina takes a step back and turns around to walk toward me once again. As the car begins to pull away, I hear a familiar phrase. One that I hear sometimes in movies. Usually from dads. Seatbelts. The car roars away. That's when I hear the screeching sounds, glass breaking. I put my head down. Martina's soft palm rests on my back now. They're okay, she says to me. I turn my head up. Their white car is rolling down the street in silence now. And everything's fine. They are okay. The following story is called Wrinkled Woman, and it is about a phenomenon that affects many people across the world. The story comes up right after this.
Angie's List is now Angie, and getting your to-do list done just got easier. Between back to school and with the holidays around the corner, it can feel like there's no time to tackle home projects. Whether you need help with emergency repairs or major upgrades, Angie matches you with top local pros who can get the job done right. Browse reviews, see upfront pricing, and instantly book hundreds of projects. Save time for what matters most. Book your next project at Angie.com. That's ANGI.com.
Support for this podcast comes from CDW and Citrix. At CDW, we get sometimes your teams have to be in two places at once.
Tell me about it. Our team lead needs to be at a wedding this weekend, but the big presentation is on Monday.
No need to panic. CDW experts can help you implement Citrix Workspace. It allows secure access to desktops from any device. Management is easy, and everyone in your office can stay close to their files and apps, even during the cha-cha slide.
Well, talk about having your cake.
And eating it, too. IT orchestration by CDW. People who get it. Find out more at cdw.com/Citrix.
It must have been around 6 in the morning when it first happened, and I blamed it on the dark curtains that Mom got me. It really threw off my sleeping schedule, with waking me up super late because of the light from the outside wouldn't come in, or too early for the same reason. I was sleeping, dreaming about I don't remember what, when suddenly I heard the sound of a pendulum clock. My body instantly froze. I looked out over the crack of the window with the curtains, the thin line of light creating a wall of floating dust and orange glow coming from the outside. My eyes couldn't move. My body couldn't move. And I was stuck in a limbo-like state where I started panicking over my inability to do so. My breathing got rougher and faster. I tried to close my eyes, but the light was somehow still coming through, and I could see absolutely everything. Everything, including a lump out in the corner of the room. Suddenly, I felt a twitch on my leg. It moved a little. I was able to turn my neck toward the dark hooded figure by the chair where my jackets had gotten stacked up. It then dropped to the floor and completely disappeared. I could feel my heart inside of my ears. I stared at the ceiling, hoping that whatever had been there in the room with me was now gone. Next thing I remember, my alarm went off at 7:15 and I was wide awake as normal. Still, that image stuck with me, and I didn't think much of it until I read somewhere about the woman who visits you in your sleep. I think it came from a movie or some type of old book that first talked about demons dancing on your stomach while you slept as it completely paralyzed you. I've heard about things like sleep paralysis, the old hag, and a lot of other theories regarding this. But still, I couldn't believe that something like that could happen to me. Mind you, the experience with the dark hooded figure happened back when I was still in high school. It was a much different experience back then. Some of my friends talked to me about it, and they seemed almost excited to hear that someone they knew had gone through something like that. So the first time I told them, I was very nervous, thinking that maybe they could see me as a crazy person. This time, I haven't shared it with anybody except for DMs with people from my groups on Facebook, and a few people that I've met through Twitter that have also gone through something like this. And if this has happened to you, be careful with what I'm about to describe, because I will try to be as accurate as possible, and that's pretty scary. It happened about 4 years ago, and the dreams were recurring for a few weeks. Still, this was such a disturbing event that I had trouble sleeping for months afterward. And there was absolutely nothing I could do except give it time. I lived by myself at this point, and I had just gotten a full-time job, and I had my own apartment. A nice place in an older part of the city, no complaints about the place at all, as I feel like it had nothing to do with what I experienced back then. I had gotten off work late that night, and I was tired and cold. It was about to start snowing, and I remember that from the radio announcement when I was cleaning up my desk for the weekend. So I was in a hurry to get home and turn on the heat, since it took a while for the place to warm up, and I really wanted to sleep as soon as possible. I shut the door and got everything ready and got ready for bed. It must have taken me 10 minutes from the time I got home to the point that you could say I was drifting off to sleep. That's when I heard a familiar sound, but I couldn't exactly place my finger on it. Then the ticking became clear, and suddenly I heard the chime of a grandfather clock. My eyes flashed wide open. I could see the purple light from the lamppost on the street coming through my window, and that near pink and orange light coming from another direction. The ticking continued, and it sounded to be right next to me when I finally heard her for the first time. She laughed. She tugged at my leg and pulled it off to the side with the cold, dry feeling of a leather jacket against the blanket. My heart started racing. I heard the taps as she stepped to the other side of the bed, her sinister laugh still echoing through the room from all directions. My elbows locked when I tried to move them. Same with my knees. I tried to open my mouth, but all I could utter was dry breaths and the distant sounds of squeaks. I felt the cold grip against my leg, pulling at it over the edge of my bed. It was trying to get me. That's when I felt a stronger pressure. The thing was climbing onto my bed. With my eyes straining to look toward my left, I was able to see the top of her head. That gray, tangled hair, in all directions, wobbled toward my side. Her eyes were busy looking around the room, glancing at me every time she scanned the corners of my bedroom. She laughed again, her black eyes looking directly at me now. The wrinkled face finally stretched sideways as her teeth, lots of them, spread across her face. Drool was dripping down the side of her neck. Her breathing sounded tired. That's when I felt it. The weight of her body against my chest. She pressed against my lungs as I felt a cold sweat across my forehead roll down between the side of my eyes and the bridge of my nose. It slid into my eyes, stinging, yet I couldn't close them. The wrinkled woman stared right at me, smiling. I tried with all my might to wiggle out from under her before she stood up on my chest. Her dark cloak swayed from side to side as she got her footing right. I started having more trouble breathing. I gasped for air to give one final push at getting my legs to move. With everything I had, I tried to kick at the air to get my body to react. And then, it worked. My leg moved. The wrinkled woman rolled off the bed with a loud thud and scurried off toward the corner of the room like a rat. I felt a tingling sensation in my arms, and I was able to turn my head. I turned away from the wrinkled woman and rolled right off the bed, tripping on my own blankets as I reached for the light switch. Only then was I able to look toward the corner of the room. Right there, where the wrinkled woman had been hiding, was an old black jacket. I picked it up, I threw it in the closet, and got back into bed. The light stayed on for the rest of the night and for the following ones. Every once in a while, I think about that event. It would be crazy for me to say that I don't think it could happen to me again. Still, I know there's very little I can do about it. Tonight, it could happen to me. Or it could happen to you. Scary Story Podcast is produced by me, Edwin Covarrubias. For more horror, check out my other podcast called A Dark Memory, where I revisit dark tales and events in a storytelling format. I'll leave a link for it on the description of this episode. Also, be sure to click follow on your podcast player to get updates for this podcast, or you can also sign up over at scarystorypodcast.com to get an email every time a new story comes out. Until next time, thank you very much for listening.
Imagine finding a suitcase that reconnected you to your forgotten roots. That's what happened to Dominic King, an organized
91 when they having to wake up every day, feeding me until the weight became unbearable, and I took to solving my own problems with things I found around the house. The pain landed on my shoulders, and I carried it on my back until, some days, even the thought of rolling out of bed felt heavy on its own. I would finally go to the kitchen, hoping that something was still in the refrigerator and that I wouldn't, for the love of God, have to go to the grocery store. It would be sometime in the middle of the night after sleeping the whole day when I'd get hungry. Sometimes it was when the only way to know if it was dusk or dawn was to make a mental note of where the shadows were forming around the room. If it was in the middle of the night, I would have no choice but to go to the pantry, the one that Stephanie spent so much time setting up, and take a red and white can out and devour it without even watering it down, ignoring the serving suggestion. My son moved back in around 1994 or 1995, I forget, but I kicked him out. That good-for-nothing kid sold the sewing machine we saved up for back when Stephanie started her design business. And even though it was long after they finally removed her business number from the yellow pages and other phone books, when the phone stopped ringing asking for her, the sewing machine was a reminder that she had once lived here. If I tried hard enough, mainly during my most painful nights, I would hear the sounds of that motor, the bobbins and the thread rattling inside that machine. If I had left him in the house for much longer, he would have sold the refrigerator or stove? We started talking again back in the year 2000, around the time of Y2K, I remember, and he apologized for telling me what he told me. We talked about it on the porch. He was about to have a child, and I can't lie that I almost felt proud of him for not turning out as bad as I thought he would. But still, those things he told me, they were true. With that sour face of mine, I would always be alone. I wanted to. I still do. When he died in that motorcycle accident, his wife took my granddaughter with her. They rarely call. At his wake, we discussed it with anger and sadness, in part because of the situation itself. But I regret saying a few things to her. It wasn't the time nor the place. This house is too big. Every nook and corner of it has a story, a place where I remember Stephanie. Every nail she pounded into the wall, every mistake with the new paint she suddenly decided to bring to the house, and quantities of 5 gallons on her way home from a meeting. The way she made fun of my expressions and the way I sighed after knowing that I would have to set up paper and tape for her to paint the walls. And then her making fun of me for spending the next 2 days out in the garage because of the smell of paint. My imaginary headache, she would say. The staircase, the funny rug story that still makes me smile. Where we thought that a long area rug would be fine to lay on top of the staircase, only to end up with it looking like a slide. The dumb rug wouldn't fold like it said on the label. We rolled it up and kept it for when we made a hallway that was long enough for it. I'm still not sure what we were talking about. I see her at the top of the staircase, her hands on her hips, pretending to leap into the slide we made by accident. I see her in the kitchen, opening every drawer on the counter, searching desperately for a rag to lift the whistling kettle, even though I told her it would be on the handle of the oven door, though I had also told her 1,000,000 times that turning off the fire under the pot would also do the trick. But when I say that I see her, I mean it. Be it my imagination or confusion, dementia, or whatever you want to call it, I see her. I promised I would find her and that I would search for the rest of my life if that was required. But the journey ended early with a visit from 2 police officers. Her body, the river, her wallet. The whole conversation was a blur, but I remember what matters. My brother came to my town not too long ago and the conversation was the same. how was I doing, and then try to poke fun at me for the memories with Stephanie. But I held back my anger this time. He got to witness the light flicker from the kitchen. He changed the topic real quick. But he had a point, and if she was still around, wasn't it because I couldn't let her go? What if she wanted to cross over, but I had been keeping her all this time? When I asked her, things took a bad turn. When I come downstairs in the middle of the night, I see her figure at the base of the stairs as it floats away toward the kitchen. She just stands there now, not doing anything at all. Her face with wide eyes looking directly at me. Her red cheeks now purple and dipped and dead. Had I started to question her existence, and that is what she was angry about? But I see her. I feel her. She's here. No, wait. I live alone. I sit by myself in a couch for two. I cook for myself, and there's always leftover water in the kettle. I live alone, everyone says. There is nobody here. The visits to the doctor with the calming voice and the questions was right. What was there for me to process? Write it down, come on, write it down, he would say. I never could. Those old printed $20 bills still sit in her wallet, I told him, somehow accepting her passing, but at the same time wondering why she hadn't spent them yet. I live alone. I eat, clean, and talk alone. I sit on this couch right now when I'm telling you this, alone. But if I'm alone, then who was that? Who was that walking upstairs? Who's coming down the staircase, huh? Turn around, look at her. If I'm alone, then who was coming up next to you? You've angered her. Turn around. Look at her. Look at her. The following story is called Your Hand on My Arm, and it is coming up right after this.
Angie's List is now Angie, and getting your to-do list done just got easier. Between back to school and with
Just above my wrist.
Matter with you.
repairs or major upgrades.
Get outside and open up that mailbox. There's nothing better than the feeling of sifting through the junk mail to discover something worthwhile. More personal, from a friend, from a family member, from someone you love. A card from Hallmark. It doesn't matter what the occasion is. Knowing you're being thought of is, well, nice. And you can pay it forward too. Let that special person know they've been on your mind. Let them know what they mean to you. It's a simple act of kindness that will make their day. Visit Hallmark.com/Spotify to shop a wide variety of birthday and just because cards and see what a card can do.
Your hand on my arm. We always laughed looking at the wedding pictures as newlyweds. The way her hand reached inside the sleeve of my jacket in order to touch my forearm, just above my wrist, was caught on camera. She used to say that she liked how cold my arm felt as the warm fingers crawled my arm like a little mouse, still warm from a nap. It was the way we used to sleep, her thin fingers walking around my arms, and I could tell when she was about to doze off by the sudden jumps her hands would make, twitching as she went off into dreamland. It is a little weird to talk about, I know. The weird quirks and things that we do. Though I am sure that as part of a couple, you also find your own weird things like that. Inside jokes, getting used to odd habits, and even made up words. When we moved into the new house, things started to change between us. And I had no clue what happened. Perhaps the reality of taking care of a real home with just the two of us is what started pressuring our relationship. Well, at least I thought it was just the two of us. I was drinking coffee one morning, remembering our forced conversation from the previous night, comparing it to how things used to be. "Do you think it's gonna rain tomorrow?" she asked me. I couldn't believe we had resorted to talk about the weather now. "I think so," I replied, hesitating on asking Alexa about the weather the next day, knowing very well that an answer would ruin our conversation for the rest of the night. "We can watch 50 First Dates tomorrow after work and order takeout. What do you think?" I asked, sheepishly enough to make me feel ashamed of myself. Was I? The feeling creeped up on me all over again. Awkwardness, or embarrassment, I think is a better word, reliving last night. And how she grunted and turned away from me. How the dark room helped me envision our life before this house, and how packing and moving our things from apartment to apartment seemed to bring us closer together. I looked at a ray of light move from one corner of the room to the other. A pair of headlights turning the corner of our block. It shined on our wedding picture and ended on our darkening curtains. The ones that sink even the sunlight and turn it into nothing but a pitch black patch of nothingness. The steps I heard from upstairs brought me back to my cup of coffee, needing once again another 30-second boost from the microwave. She was heading toward the staircase and to the kitchen to grab the water from the kettle I prepared for us every morning. She used to stand behind me, like when I was a better reader, and would lean against my shoulders to ask about what I was reading. Her hand would reach for my arm, and I recognized that tingling sensation of her warm hands against my cold wrist. The coffee wouldn't get cold back then. This house wasn't like any other place. Some rooms felt colder, unnaturally colder, and others were just cold. Plus, neither of us wanted to clean the living room, and we both, at one point, spoke about how draining the house made us feel. It got us out of the house more, which was nice for a while. She complained a few times about the laundry room in the basement and eventually simply refused to go in there and had me move the washer and dryer, along with the lengthy installations over to the side of the house, a tiny room by the kitchen. Her claims were ridiculous, but the most vivid explanation she gave me came one afternoon, when she had worked from home. I arrived to find her out on the porch, looking as pale as a ghost. She started crying when she explained to me what she had seen. She had forgotten to pick up her clothes from the dryer at night, something that didn't surprise me when I heard it, because one of her clothes needed to be taken out right away in order to stop it from getting wrinkled. So she rushed downstairs to the basement and went past the bookshelf I was working on, and she spotted a figure in the corner of the basement, where the water heater was. I interrupted to explain that I had put insulation on the water heater, but she simply kept going. Without complaining that I cut off her story, and she kept staring out into the street, her eyes lost somewhere in the vision of what she had experienced, lips still moving. I stopped talking. She had seen a woman in a white dress, bending to pick up some invisible basket from the basement floor. Her hair was neat, and her face was young, but her legs were twisted as it carried her unnaturally toward the other corner of the basement. I got closer to her as she explained what she felt, putting my hand on her lap. She put her other hand on my forearm. She was cold this time. She explained that her own leg stopped working when she tried to run back to the stairs, grabbing onto the crooked bookcase before falling straight to the concrete floor. But between the shelves, she could see the strange silhouette turning her face, her eyes suddenly becoming jet black, and her mouth opening wide. She was approaching with crooked steps. With feeling in her legs now, my wife started crawling toward the staircase, putting her hands directly on the last steps and dragging herself up until she was able to run up the stairs. She was leaning heavily on the wooden handrail. All she could hear from behind her now were the creepy sounds of laughter, echoing softly through the basement. I put my arm around her, my mind still trying to come up with an explanation of what she had seen. She knew I wouldn't believe her, just like I didn't believe her when she told me that she had felt a pair of hands trying to push her down the regular staircase. Or the time that the kitchen rag that she used daily caught on fire on its own. Her claims that someone was trying to get rid of her made no sense. Now I know what she was talking about. Within a week of my own experience, we had gathered our things and gotten out of that place. It was just another night. She had gotten a warning at work that day, and she was in a terrible mood. I remember how easy it used to be to make her smile again. Instead, I had to avoid bumping into her in the kitchen or in the living room. I stayed out in the garage until it was too cold to be there, ready to get to bed. I went to my side of the bed, and she was reading a paperback book, which I found unusual, but still, I simply said goodnight and turned off my lamp. I had been having nightmares for the past several days, so I had trouble falling asleep, thinking about the figures in the room at night. A woman, specifically, floating by the foot of the bed and standing by my wife, staring at her, completely still. When I moved my eyes toward her, she would blink, slowly, and turn her neck toward me. She would blink once more and turn back to her sinister stare. No expressions, no movements. Her jaw hanging loose by only her skin, with a large, dark gash on her left cheekbone, blending in with her long, dark hair. I wasn't about to tell my wife about that. Eventually, I managed to get to sleep when I felt that warm hand on my arm. She was still awake, it seemed. Maybe she wanted to talk with me about something, but I hesitated. In the darkness, I figured I'd just ask how she was doing, so I whispered it. There was no response. I felt her sniffle a little, her hand doing the walking motion with her fingers all over my forearm, just like she used to. I remembered the happy days again, when we ate on a cardboard box and she dared me to wear a bow tie to work the following day. I remembered her hand when we sat by the river that her parents had near their home when we first met. The way she made me laugh, telling me that her hand was a spider looking for a home. I suddenly felt goosebumps followed by the waves of chills that her hand sometimes made me feel. Her fingers ran up and down my forearm, but they lost their warmth. They became rough and heavy. And I felt the sting of her nails breaking through my skin. I pulled my arm away and reached for the lamp. I turned around. My wife was next to me, sleeping on her side, but facing away from me. I looked at my arm to see the stripes of dripping red liquid coming out of my skin. I screamed, startling her. She sat up quickly and scooted over to me, pointing at the door, unable to say a word. I looked in that direction. At the doorway was the woman in the white dress. She looked toward the hallway. Her legs started twisting robotically away from the room. Things have been better since we moved away. The stories in Scary Story Podcast are all written and produced by me, Edwin Covarrubias. Stay in touch by heading over to scarystorypodcast.com, where you can find my email and ways to get notifications of new stories right through your inbox. If you'd rather be notified through your podcast app, simply click follow right now to get alerts when the new episodes come out. Until next time, thank you very much for listening.
This episode is brought to you by DirecTV Stream. Introducing DirecTV Stream, the best of live TV and on demand, which means you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. So whether you want to catch the game live or watch the latest blockbuster, they've got you covered. And there's no annual contract. DirecTV Stream. Get your TV together at directtv.com. Requires high-speed internet and compatible device. Content varies by package and location. Restrictions apply.
Welcome to Scary Story Podcast. In this episode, I share two stories. One of them being the experience of a young boy walking home, and the other about a true phenomenon that happens to hundreds of people around the world, losing sense of reality. My name is Edwin. Here is a scary story. Hey, come here. It was late in the evening and little George was waiting for his mom to get off work at the door of the bakery. He was asked by the manager not to stand too close to the door, because customers had often asked who the little boy by the window was. And the manager felt uncomfortable saying that he was the son of one of his employees. George remembered this and moved back to wait by one of the steps off to the side. Why the manager simply didn't let George wait inside was beyond me. But George had gotten invited inside a couple of times, often to the awkward smile of the patrons feeling sorry for him as he stepped toward the warm ovens, and he avoided Mr. Smith's glare along with the fake smile he would display after being forced to let him inside the shop. The wind usually picked up around the time that his mom clocked out, so the little boy would break the customer's heart by simply standing there, by the door, peeking inside, and standing out in the wind. It was okay with George. Instead of watching for his mom to see if she picked up the basket by the cash register, he'd wait to be surprised. There was bread in there. And sometimes there were these croissants with the beef sausage inside. George figured that waiting for his mom to cross the door was just the same. He would look right at her and then down at her side. She usually had a bag, sometimes a small one. And other times, it was a large paper bag stuffed to the top with bread. Still, he couldn't help but walk across the door a few times to see if his mom was near that basket on the counter. It seemed to be about an extra hour, though it could have been only a few minutes later. But George was greeted by surprise when his mom stepped out of the shop. "George, help me out with this, will you?" his mom said in her soft voice. His brown shoes crunched against that loose gravel on the sidewalk. He grabbed the bag. He could usually tell when Mom was in a good mood and when she was tired, which I guess some would call a bad mood, though comparing the two didn't seem to match for some reason. Today, he had no idea. She stepped in front of him, crossing those dark paved streets. Usually their voices were the only ones that could be heard at that hour, with the distant chatter of people coming from the windows with the flashing blue lights of the television, shining through the large windows of the living room. Once they got home, though, their windows would be lit with that warm orange light of the kitchen, but never the blue lights. Television at night gives you nightmares, Mom would say. And so George followed 4 or 5 steps behind his mother down the street before turning into the dark dirt road that would lead them straight home. The bread he hugged with his arms was getting heavier, so he decided to stop and adjust it, raising it higher toward his shoulders. 7 steps behind his mother now. He squished the bread with his left hand through the paper bag and put his right hand on the bottom of it, but it took some fiddling around. It was about 15 steps behind her now, his mom visible only because of her yellow and white uniform of Smith Bakery. He was trying to pick up the pace, but his mother didn't get any closer. He wanted to call out for her, but he remembered when he did that last time. Neighbors were sleeping, don't make too much noise, she said. So he focused on the sounds of those crickets by the pond they were about to pass on their left. The orange light post up ahead was right where their house was. He could see it now. He was getting closer to his mother, too. That's when he heard it. "Hey, come here. Come here," he heard from behind him. He turned around, trying not to stop completely in fear of losing his mother in the darkness. He may have seen something hiding behind the oak tree in front of one of the neighbors' homes. He wasn't too sure. He felt uneasy now. Hey, come here. George thought about running to catch up to his mother. Hey, come here. Come here, he heard once again. Closer this time. George didn't turn around. Instead, he started running. Upon hearing his footsteps, George's mother turned around and let out a scream. Behind her son was a pudgy small man about the height of a large dog, a big hat on his head. George turned around to see the thing's huge nose on its wrinkled face about 2 steps away from him. It seemed just as scared and jumped toward the bushes on the side of the road. In the confusion, some of the bread had fallen off the bag, and George's mother was running toward her son. Little George remembered this scene for years, and the sight of the bread falling off the bag, the croissants spilling over to the side. He stayed close to the door of the bakery from that point forward. He walked next to his mother on the way home. But still, on some dark nights, you can still hear the little man's voice from the side of the road. Hey, come here. Come here. The next story is called Cult of Burials, and it is coming up right after a quick word from sponsors that help make the show possible.
Angie's List is now Angie, and getting your to-do list done just got easier. Between back to school and with
Anything you share is confidential. The next story is called Cult of Burials, and it is coming up right after a quick word from sponsors that help make the show possible.
that's ANGI.
Of your happy topics, rooms to get help. Now you can talk with licensed professional counselors who are specialized in depression, stress, family conflicts, anxiety, and more topics, right from your home. Anything you share is confidential, but please remember that this is not a crisis line. If you'd like, you can check out the testimonials posted daily on their website. So many people have been using BetterHelp that they are now recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. I want you to start living a happier life today. And as a listener of Scary Story Podcast, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting betterhelp.com/scarystory. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/scarystory. Cult of Burial. It was 2015, and Diana had decided to take a trip down to South America and do something that she explained in many words. But to summarize it, it was basically a really long walk. People do this in the United States and all around the world. Long treks across states or countries, all seeking something different. Some type of eye-opening experience, and some look for closure from it, while others grieve while walking. She made it seem like it was a safe thing to do, but I'm sure she didn't watch the same videos that I did on the trail. The crime. The disappearances. I tend to get paranoid about this sort of thing, and even though I'm sure that those are exceptions and a very slim percentage of what actually happens, the horrific stories themselves are what make me think twice about ever doing a walk like that. Hands being severed and placed on the windshields of cars. People breaking into tents and stabbing sleepers for no reason. Yeah, no thanks. But Diana was my best friend, and I think aside from me imagining her horrible death, I was mainly worried about her finding her new favorite place and forgetting about me. Selfish, I know. But she did invite me, and I said no. It was a type of guilt I felt in knowing that something could happen to her because she was traveling alone. She kept me updated throughout the whole trip whenever she found free Wi-Fi. I really didn't think I would lose her. At least not in the way that I did. It was gross, but she sent me a photo of her blistered feet at one point. And I remembered thinking about how strange it would be if that were to be the last photo she ever sent me, memorialized forever as the last message. Thankfully, she sent me other messages soon after that. She sounded like she was having fun, making friends, and enjoying herself. Exhausted, but day turned around after that cold apple juice from a lonely shop before entering one of the prettiest small towns with the views of the rolling hills. She sounded like a poet. And that she actually was. It was how we met, actually, and there was lots of things we talked about that she suddenly added color to. Extra words, and sometimes, only sometimes, she would start crying at the sentences she formed. She would then take out that ugly brown notebook, shake her pen, and trap the sentence in the yellowed paper, next to the other paragraphs that she had come up with, sometimes with little sketches. But the messages eventually slowed down, and honestly, I was starting to grow envious of the amazing days she was having. The lack of text wasn't as concerning as I thought it would be. She was woken up by roosters and rays of sunshine, while I had my old trusty iPhone yelling at me every morning to hop in the shower. Otherwise, I'd miss the 6 a.m. train down to my cubicle. And it was there, on my cube, right under the office lights that weren't working, where my heart dropped to my stomach on a Thursday afternoon, at the latest message she had sent me just as I was about to leave for the day. Something happened, she said. I clicked through the screen to find the rest of the messages, where she explained that I thought she would think that she was crazy for what she was about to tell me, but that she was approached by 2 men while out on the trail. My finger was shaking in front of the blue text bubbles, so I moved it to the side as I gripped the phone with both hands. I could feel the phone slipping through the sweat between my palms and the see-through plastic case that Diana and I bought together. The one we said we would fill with stickers, but never did. She was at a hostel now, she said. She was going to do some readings and asked if she could call me once she was done. That it would be 9 p.m., my time. Of course that was okay, but I decided to call her anyway, only to get the message that the phone number could not be reached. She had gotten a new data plan and phone number while traveling, so that made sense. It seemed like forever, but 9 o'clock came, and as punctual as ever, the unfamiliar FaceTime audio ringtone came on. Hey, so the Wi-Fi slows down in about 10 minutes, but basically a couple of guys gave me a folded piece of paper. I know this sounds crazy, but there's an information seminar not too far from here that talks about just what I was looking for. It's about the truth. And I'll send you a picture of it. Wait, hold on. And with that, she hung up, sent a photo of a bright green flyer in English, and called back. Diana explained at 1,000 words per minute that this group knew about the existence of aliens and that they live among us. That there was a man who could answer all these questions and would serve as a bridge between the superior beings and the listeners. That she would have to be there to believe it. I laughed. I imagined a man with a tinfoil hat, ready to receive signals from outer space and communicate the messages, all for 3 easy payments of $1,000 each. Her tone changed immediately, first to anger and then to cries. All I could hear were sniffles and her distorted voice as she complained to me that nobody ever took her seriously, that she's no longer the same person that she used to be, that she wished for people to be able to see that. I had heard that speech before, and suddenly the worries that I had for her went away, and all I could think about was that she was always coming off as that entitled brat that made everything about her. The deposits her dad made to her account stopped her from ever holding onto a real job, with the exception of a food delivery gig she took up with a vegan shop from our town. It was part of their motto that deliveries were to be made on bicycle or on foot. And again, I laughed when she first told me about it. but I held back yelling at her and telling her exactly what I thought about her at that moment, just like I always did. I felt shocked. Then I let the logic come back to me as I thought of reasons why her actions didn't surprise me at all. And with that, she got lost. She stopped replying to my messages. First for a couple of months. But I would get phone calls from her parents every day, 2 to 3 times, asking if I had heard anything from her. And that turned into a couple of years. Apparently, she had been sending her parents messages from anonymous numbers saying that she was alright, that there was nothing to worry about, and that she needed money. She wouldn't say where she was, but some savvy friends of hers were able to trace her down thanks to the internet connection she used. The area was a small town in the country of Chile. Then she moved up north to Peru, and later on ended up in Nicaragua. It is still tough for me to believe that in 2017, her photo showed up on an internet article. One of my friends had set up an image recognition bot to scan websites with conspiracies and for known cults that matched the name of the flyer that she sent me. Burials. Dismiss what you know. They are waiting for us, it read. She was sitting in a circle of people. Her blonde hair had grown significantly. And she wore clothes that looked like rags of the color that matched palm leaves. The group she belongs to believes in creating a separate society where everything is shared, where beings from other planets are able to cohabit with them, that they will learn the powers of our ancestors, whatever those are. She sends messages every once in a while, but I rarely hear from her now. And though her parents and I know that she is alive, we still have to accept that the Diana we once knew is dead. Just like her story, there are thousands of them out there. People who get lost, fooled by others, and their own minds. Scary Story Podcast is produced by me, Edwin Covarrubias. To stay up to date with the podcast, you can sign up for notifications by heading over to scarystorypodcast.com. Or you can also click follow right now on your podcast player. Until next time, thank you very much for listening.
Support for this podcast comes from NHTSA. If you're ever stopped at a railway crossing and the signals are flashing and you don't see the train or it appears to be moving slowly, and you're thinking maybe you could get across the tracks before the train comes, think about this. Even if the engineer sees you and applies emergency brakes right away, it can take a train over a mile to stop. Over a mile to stop. By that time, it's too late, and the resulting crash will be deadly. Stop. Trains can't.
Welcome to Scary Story Podcast. In our stories, we explore a traumatic dark memory and the role it plays in daily life. Then fear arrives in our second story in the shape of a ghostly woman that waits for you in the dark. My name is Edwin. Here is a scary story. Seatbelt. I watched as the 2 kids that my friends brought over one afternoon chased each other in the front yard. Their parents were supposedly out for a regular doctor's appointment. Martina had heard around their circle of friends that Patty was about to get plastic surgery, implants or something. I don't know much about that, but I didn't find it surprising. And definitely didn't find it worthy of what seemed like 2-hour conversations with my wife every single day that past week. Martina stepped out to the porch with me, the 2 kids now rolling over each other on the grass. "Hey," I yelled out. Rough play was out of the question. I felt Martina's light hand touch mine with that familiar, "I'll take care of it" feel she used to give me. Clara had to ask Martina if she had thought about surgery herself, and I offended her, I'm assuming. since she gasped and then started telling me even more about how the procedures work and things like that. It is a topic I avoid, especially after seeing my own nose in the mirror every day. But I had lived with it almost all my life, and I was used to it by now. She was the one that had to see it every day, while all I had to do was avoid mirrors and I'd be okay. She then told me about what their other friend, I forget her name, said about the surgery that Patty was getting, and how they assumed that they were going to cover up the procedure since, according to their suspicions, Patty would have to be looked after for a couple of weeks, and part of her body would be swollen beyond belief. Again, I didn't ask about this. It was just a thing that presented itself. It presented itself over and over, and eventually all of the useless information got into this brain of mine. Martina and I met with her telling me stories about her friends and her life in college. I figured that if she knew right off the bat what a terrible listener I am, she'd politely let me know that we wouldn't work and move on. And then I'd move on. Just like all those other times. But Martina was different. Sure, she talked a lot, but she also took my obsessions very seriously, and in a strange way, I almost respected them. They weren't too bad, but I knew of the trouble they had caused me and my friends in the past. I couldn't have roommates because of the precautions I would take over everything. Spills in the kitchen were to be cleaned up right away. Shoes with non-slip soles to be worn at all times. No glass cups or plates or bottles. I try to get my vegetables and fruits pre-sliced to avoid using the only knife in the house. Martina used it most of the time. There was another thing with the nightmares. Things I simply couldn't erase. I haven't had the same dreams as often as I used to, but the memories are still there, and they are not pretty. There's one that comes back in flashes. I'm sitting in the car. My shoes look small and untied. I look out to the window to see the blue sky. The window above me is tall enough so that I couldn't see what was next to me in the side of the car. That sky more than made up for it. Another flash. I look up toward the seat in front of me and laugh. Having the window open like that, the wind at the perfect temperature, flowing almost like the texture of water over my forehead, splashing behind my head and on the edges of my ears. A second flash. A girl, my sister, I think, sitting in the back seat with me, reaching her hand out toward me as I laugh at her face that she's making. My laughter dies off as I stare at a red rectangle, a button, on the seat next to her. She laughs. I laugh again. She looks away to the window as a red button pulls me toward it, but when I press it, it doesn't move. It doesn't do anything. I feel disappointment, anger, almost. I press harder until I hear a snap. My sister looks down on my hand and smiles, then pushes my hand away. But just then the car begins to shake and I hear the screeching sounds of another car. Glass breaking. The third and final flash. I open my eyes and I can see through the window now. The girl, my sister, is across the highway. Her leg bent the other way. But I can't see her face and I can't tell if it's her. The window is broken and she doesn't move. And it is like this most times. Other times I hear men in uniform coming to get me. My mom and dad running toward the young girl in the highway. Blood runs down my mom's face. She picks up tiny white bones from the road and cups them in her bloody left hand. Sometimes I hear sirens, and others I don't hear anything.